In the previous video, we rolled back our pipeline to the state it was in before Great Expectations was integrated. Now let's go through the steps required to integrate Great Expectations back and to get to our first validation task where Great Expectations validates the input files. Let's go to the terminal, to our project, and run Great Expectations init. This command adds the new directory, Great Expectations, sets the configuration file, and helps us create our first expectation suite. We're choosing here files, not relational database, because our first step is validating the files. We use pandas, not PySpark in this example. Let's give a new name to the expectation suite. We will call it the same as before. MPI small file. Great Expectation now profiles the file and generates the initial expectations and puts them into the expectation suite under the name that we gave it. As you see, the expectations are not exactly the tool that we needed for the state column. Instead, it's more of a demo of what statements can be made using Great Expectations. We can edit the expectation suite in order to remove all expectations that we don't need and add all those that we do. If we click on the How to Edit the Suite button, it will show us the command that we can copy into the terminal, and when we run it, the CLI generates a Jupyter notebook from the expectation suite, and that notebook serves as the UI for editing the expectation suite. Here you see all the expectations that already were here, and we said that we don't care about those columns. So let's just delete them. Okay, let's say that we care only about the column state. Let's add a comment just for our convenience. Let's add a new cell and express our two requirements. Our first requirement was that most records have non-empty state value. Expect column values to not be null. That's the column name. And remember, we said that we are adding the argument mostly to signify our tolerance. Well, as long as at least 95% of our records satisfy the requirement, we're good. Great, done. Let's go to our next expectation. We want to make sure that when non-empty, the state values are valid state abbreviations, two-letter ones. So expect value, so expect column value, column values to be in set, each column state. And now we can provide the set that we require via the argument value set. And I happen to have the list of the abbreviations that we consider valid right here. I will copy them into the notebook, run them. When we add an expectation, it immediately validates it against the sample data that we loaded. All right, now that we edit our expectations, we just have to rerun this notebook, run all cells, and it will save the updated expectation suite and re-render the data docs. Here's our expectation suite and our two expectations. Great. Now that we have the expectation suite, let's go back to our Airflow file and add back the first task that validates the input files. We'll make it the first task. And now we can uncomment this task. Task validates source data. Here. This task is using the Airflow Python operator, and this is the method that is called by the operator here. We are initializing the context, which reads the Great Expectations config file. We are specifying which batch of data to load for validation, and we're specifying which expectation split by name it needs to be validated against. And then we call the validation operator to actually do the validation. And if the results returned by the operator is not successful, we will throw an exception. We've seen this code before. One thing we need to adjust, you see that when we specify which data needs to be validated, there is this data source key. The name of the data source input files is taken from the configuration file for Great Expectations. Let's open it and see if it's correct. In it, we can see the data sources section. And by default, our data source was given a different name, files data source. Let's just rename it in the config file. Now it's called input files again. Great. Now our code corresponds to the name of the data source in the config file. Great, we are ready to run our pipeline called Airflow backfill. We expect the first step to fail because we know that we have 3 records that do not meet our expectations. Our pipeline indeed failed. Let's go to our data docs, and here's our validation result. By the way, that long string is the run ID of the Airflow DAG, so it's relatively easy to link between Airflow and validations. Let's click through, and the only expectation that did not pass is our requirement for the state value to be a valid 2-letter state abbreviation, and we know that we have 3 records that validate this expectation. So as you see, just in several minutes, we went from nothing to integrating Great Expectations into the pipeline and protecting it against the invalid data.